Welcome to the Ithaca premiere of Damn Duchess, and Whiskey Tit presents 3 readers tonight with musicians. And I want to thank Miette, who is the publisher and supporter of the writers, and for which we are extremely grateful, because it really sucks being a writer without a publisher. And she's committed herself to publishing works that other people won't publish. And that's been great for Margaret and Svetlana and for me. So we decided that an evening of music and spoken word would be really cool. So Mary, Matt, and Billy agreed to accompany us, and I'm really grateful that they did that, because they're wonderful musicians and they have a real understanding of the relationship between spoken word and music. And I've worked with all of them in one way or another. So the first, and I want to thank you all for coming out tonight to an obscure area on a beautiful floodplain. And the first work is called Knickpoint, and it's by Margaret Wedge, who is local. She grew up in the Ithaca area, in Trumansburg in Ithaca, and she lives in Binghamton, and came all the way up here to read from this really incredible group of prose poems, which is a memoir. And it speaks for itself, and I'm a huge admirer of her work and of her. So, without much more ado, Margaret.
Hello everyone, and even if John knows you all, I don't. So that's nice to be seeing some new faces. I lost my page, but so this is a memoir, and not to give you too much information, but there are 2 characters that you'll need to know. Paul is the first, and he is this guy that I have loved, and he was arrested for sexual abuse. So things kind of got a little wild for me. And the other character is August, and well, you'll meet him. And I met him too. Okay, so this section is called A Piece of the Sky. Can you hear me okay? Is that better? Okay. Mechanical erosion. The particulate breakdown of rock or soil into clastic sediment, geologic detritus, which is then transported elsewhere by the surface processes of water flow or wind. At toxic levels, mood stabilizers scrub the human system in the blood. And this is about this town. Piss in the bathtub, piss in the stoppered sink. There's piss in the parking garages in this city too, but I would get paid $5 an hour more to take care of it there. August and I worked together for a while in a yellow house on a street that begins at the fire station, cleaning and sweeping and scrubbing away debris as if this were the catacombs, and under the bones we'd find the entrance to hell itself. Certain stories are not to be repeated, understood? Certain warnings, certain 5 alarm bells, I ignore. The extra set of keys for the yellow house hangs in our rehabilitative housing office downtown. There are somewhere near 30 sets of keys hanging here, each corresponding to an apartment leased in the city on temporary behalf of a person or persons who are said to be mentally ill. Breakdown. My mother and aunt work in mental health. Let's call it Lineage City. It's how I get the job. August is the housing manager and forgets his on-call bag in the back of my mother's car. They work for different agencies but ride together. He needs the phone in the briefcase for emergencies at night. If no one answers, leave a message. If no one calls back in 15 minutes, call again. Repeat if necessary. Call 911 if necessary. He makes a special trip to get it back from her because someone always calls. I go along with them in the car to my dusty job archiving paleontological volumes 1 day a week in the spring. He insists on sitting behind me. He He falls asleep slumped over the middle on warm afternoons. You're better than that job, he says, and you know it, or you wouldn't be looking for something else. I have a brother, but August, for a time, is like the son my mother never had. Deposition, buildup of sediments, soil, and rocks, resulting from loss of kinetic energy in water or wind. After a form interview, August hires me to work for him at the rehabilitative housing office downtown. Build up. Sometimes he buys me black gas station coffee in a paper cup. I try to be disinterested in August. I scowl out the car window mornings all summer long as a defense. But attention builds, a fondness I didn't intend. The lion is most handsome when looking for food. Rumi. I have a husband, but this is not the point. I wonder if Paul could be right for rehabilitative housing. Can't be a sex offender, August says. If you bite your fingernails enough, it's possible to damage your front teeth, I notice. After hours, I fill the back of the rehabilitative housing office van with bricks from a demolition site nearby. There are birds in a book I read once who are called to the scene when something significant needs to be cleaned. Scavengers, sort of, but in removing the unsightly or difficult material, these particular apparitions have the unfortunate tendency to rip rather too much away. Sometimes they take a piece of the sky by mistake. I redistribute the bricks to the edge of our office's garden, but I am unable to restore what is missing above our heads. My mother dreamt me out of Chernobyl. I was born exactly 9 months after the Ukrainian nuclear reactor accident, 3 weeks early. Conceived, she says, after 15 years of trying, just as the radiation cloud reached my parents where they lived. Don't say we're moving, Mom, I love my home. Like that, non-cancer, say, more tests, say, cure. 2 holiday hospitals, 2 surgeries in December. Little soldier I, deserter from the Navy. August and I ride together without my mom, whose chemotherapy treatments now interfere with her work. Caroline. Somewhere outside the city, after the freshly cooled air has shocked the leafy trees, I wonder if the circling snowflakes barely formed that mist the car like stars will witness this moment. Me laughing because you are here. The galaxy awaiting like Oz. August plants images of kisses like seeds. I have a husband, but this is not the point. I say, I don't think perfect love exists without perfect tragedy. Kings of Leon, Isle of Wight. August says he knows me better than I know him. We drive through Caroline a second time, morning after the first, morning after the rain that came later froze onto the trees and the storm had moved most of the way away. This is our crystal in Bavaria. The actual poem is never the one I had planned. My husband and I hire the garbage department to roll a dumpster on our lawn, to catch the scraps launched out the windows of our disintegrating lives. Plural, lives, not singular. Wallboard in snow dissolves to paste. We handle the demolition ourselves. Cloverleaf curve, close to the dwelling we thought we could love into something grand. The bridge barrier guardrail seems a simpler construction. The wrist twitch, the wreckage, the outward and visible sign. More than once in these hours, I overhear August say, stage 4, and there is no stage 5. We become the cancer patient parent twins. I try to send text messages, but they keep coming out in hand signals. I want you, but not like this. Blood transfusions and missed coffee dates at Christmas. At New Year's, my mother's birthday, I want to sit in the rain by the river. I want to pretend I am drifting downstream. And I'm going to read this other section. Rehabilitation. One of the most difficult concepts to apply in river restoration or rehabilitation is the idea that each river is a uniquely functioning ecosystem, dynamic in space and time. At work, the State Office of Mental Health requires all clients to prove every year that they are capable of preserving their own lives in an emergency. I say, name some ways you'll tell if there's a fire in your apartment. One resident responds, see smoke. What else? See flames. Okay, one more. 30 seconds or 60 minutes or 13 years pass with no response. What do you do if you're in the living room and your hallway is on fire? Get a ladder, go down it. Where are you gonna get the ladder? Good point. We have the same conversation, bullet for bullet, the following day and the following. The lithium he takes is saving his life instead. Early on, I volunteer at a conference for adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse at the city's Holiday Inn. August pops in at the beginning, disappears. A hotel guest, or maybe a man off the street, wanders over to the table where I am selling the book for survivors, takes in the title and says, "What a bunch of faggots." A man with a nervous condition, open sores on his legs, and sometimes I share the couch with his scabs. Enough bright light exposure can lessen even the most serious scars. We hire a cleaning service to get the blood off the walls. I learned to handle the psych unit checkouts on my own. Master's degree, paella, I learned that saffron is more expensive by weight than gold. Once in a while, these bright gems. Maintenance man Sherman, who fiddles under sinks, holds his feet beneath his hulking frame on the floor like a child. Schizophrenic mirror writing, cheekbone tattoo, fox fur left on the fire escape in the rain. Well, I just went over to free lunch at Loaves and Fishes. It was a madhouse. What, did they run out of salt? No, they had too much of it and they were pouring it in everybody's wounds. Bedroom TV splashed with semen. Aldi's bag filled with used condom and hung on a nail by the bed. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And when you look long into an abyss, the abyss also looks into you. Nietzsche. Abstract thinking test. Shallow brooks babble. Still waters run deep. Can't imagine what that means. We keep the controlled substances in a double-locked cupboard. Valium, Restoril, Suboxone. I find a Xanax oval on the floor. Want to split it? August asks. I'll split my mother's pills and take them later as she dies. I watch a young man die, as if it were possible to die more than once, as if the once extinct Washington Wolverine were capable of making a comeback, as the Weekend Times proclaimed. August winks at me sadly over the body of the ventilated boy, and we talk to him. I describe last autumn's dresses from a magazine. In spite of myself, I give up the certainty to which I cling. What is this extinction anyway? Car dreams now, all the time. Standard transmission. I shift through the gears in my sleep. My 2 o'clock Tuesday writes everything down, underlines it and boxes it in. Takes pictures of road signs and historical markers and the rules for the community swimming pool and prints the gritty home screen of her email page every time she opens it up. If she can catalog it all, she'll understand it all. Better to be crazy than stupid, she thinks. She tantrums, drives her car faster than she should in the city. It's rumored she hit someone once in a crosswalk who happened to be in her way. The maps of the city maintained by the records department downtown are supervised closely, copies given only out on special request. Once I was encouraged to look closely and think carefully about what the control of a landscape might mean. But all I could think of to do with this copy today is write porch church and steel deck and lover on certain streets, as if naming the things that held weight would make them more possible for a person to own. Gorge Bridge jumping suicide prevention meeting, City High School, 7 p.m. Elected officials, concerned individuals, mental health care professionals, college advocacy groups, reporters, and a woman my mother knew once who says, "What about guns? Our greatest asset is our greatest liability," maybe they say. And I don't notice it now, but later I will. The blending, the topographic transference of beauty and risk from landscape to being alive in this town. I read August poetry in February and take liberties with the responses he does not give. I get hung up on the part of the movie The Visitor in which the white woman asks the black woman where in Africa she is from. Senegal? "Oh," the white woman says too loudly, "I was in Cape Town 2 winters ago," as if discovering they come from neighboring towns. "It was just beautiful." Taking liberties. I get a text message from Paul early on the 14th of February that says, "Happy VD." And what else can I do but laugh? In the car that Valentine's morning with August, I let something I shouldn't slip. Later, he tells me he dreamt he was in my mouth, hard enough to make me sick. On my face, redness of heat and shame from wanting. Later, I steal images of similar acts implied. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm going to read from a work in progress, and I'm going to try to set it up because this is not a major character, and it's called Belustian. Belustian is an intelligence operative in New York City 500 years in the future, and in that world, the United States House and Senate are located at the UN building in New York City, and federal troops dressed in red suits of armor guard the senators and House members, and they all have security details. But the ruler, and there are rulers in this world 500 years in the future, of New York, despises the President of the United States and deeply resents having red armored guards roaming his city. The other senator from New York, Maximilian, is another man he hates, and he has decided that he needs to be assassinated. And Belustian, with his partners Cowrie and Whitehead, have been given the assignment of starting a shootout on the UN Plaza to create a diversion so that an assassin can shoot Maximilian at 1:22 in the afternoon when he habitually leaves for lunch before anybody else does. And so they decide to do so, they need to wear a suit of red armor so they'll blend in. And the only way they can get this suit of red armor is to get one of these guards to take that suit of red armor off, since it's impervious to bullets, and they're not going to take it from them by shooting them. So they come up with this plan to get them to go to a whorehouse, and they will take their red suit of armor off in order to, screw one of the whores, and they'll steal it. And it sounds like a really good plan. So this is called Belustian, and it begins in darkness. Belustian awoke on a hard bed in the dark. He did not know where or even who he was. He wasn't even certain he was alive, except that his eyes hammered in their sockets and his mouth tasted like dog shit. Lights flashed in fading sheets in his head in the air. He coughed up something sick and slippery and swallowed it. The next cough was dry, hoarse. He swung his legs off the cot and rested his body on his forearms and knees, face to the floor. His stomach burned. He belched. Bile surged into his throat. In his ears, the groans of Promethean pain. He must be alive. He tried to remember where he was born, but he couldn't. He blinked and teared up when he saw red runner lights and the outline of bundles on cots. He smelled the feet, the breath, and the farts of dreaming soldiers and thought it was a morgue. Either he was dead, or they had made a mistake and placed him with the dead. He searched his mind for a memory, but everything was pitch black and soundless. The last thing he remembered was crawling on the floor of a room in a whorehouse called Marjorie Milk. The red suit! Where is the suit, he wondered. His heart was pounding in his eyes, a jumble of images. He, Whitehead, and Cowrie had gone out to wait for the whores to come back with the suits. They went to eat pork steaks and French fries at a dive called Dr. Chang's on Lexington Avenue. They smoked a few joints and moved on to Nelson's Pillar, an Irish toilet around the corner, to get drunk and shoot darts. After that, the images fell apart and became disjointed in time. He drove. The windows were open and he was hunched over the wheel, stuporous, tunneling into a smear of light in blind terror. And the terror hadn't gone away. Part of his brain was still driving. There was a man in a bow tie with eyes popping out saying, "Room 1405 to 1409. Belustian watched the doors swim around and tried to find the handle to the hallway door he was to take to reach room 1409. The hall he took was magenta with black stripes and yellow fixtures. The doors were cockeyed. He lurched by, staring with one eye at the numbers, tacking, intermittently bumping into the walls until he located room 1409. Behind the door lay an inscrutable darkness, woozy with objects resolving slowly into a pile of crimson armor, black satin sheets on the bed. Beyond was light in a doorway and the sound of two women talking. He crept in on his hands and knees. Noisily, he gathered the armor up and left the room as he came, on his hands and knees, dragging it behind him. After that, nothing. And now, nothing. Belustian's eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. He felt he could lift his head without vomiting. His skin was clammy with sweat. He took a grumbling breath and looked up and knew where he was. It was not a morgue, and he was not dead. He was in the armory. He had made it home. The New York City Armory. Soldiers, not corpses, were stretched out on cots, sleeping in uniform. He stood and went to the door. He looked down at his legs. He was not dressed. He was naked below the waist. He found his pants on the floor. They were covered in vomit. He looked around and saw a pair of clean sweatpants neatly folded by the cot of another soldier. He staggered over, swiped the pants, and put them on. He crept toward the door, listened, and yanked it open. A throng rushed by of soldiers and civilians, rulers and humans. It was a bright concourse through the armory. High above, the windows blasted sun. It had to be after 7 in the morning. It was late. He oriented himself and headed down to the mess, a large tiled, windowless expanse of tables and a cafeteria line with food behind glass. He took his tray and stood on line with soldiers and civilians coming off the night shift. There was laughter, gossip. He saw the woman engineer from Charlie Company in her short shorts, off duty. He tried to catch her eye, and then thought better of it, given what he must look like. He wore no insignia, he had no rank, no known mission. He smelled of vomit and booze. He was disheveled. He could see himself and smell himself, and now he was cringing. Belustian looked away. He couldn't even be sure he was there. Then he thought that if he could think that, he must be there. But then, didn't he have to be there to think that? And what would his wife say about the girl from Charlie Company? What if she did the same thing? How would he feel? Never fucking mind, he thought. It was before 9. There had to be breakfast somewhere. He stared at the trays of food. Yellow mashed potatoes showed through cracks in the heat lamp crust. Meatloaf and gravy, pizza. A man in a chef's toque dumped a bucket of black beans and a bucket of yellow rice into trays, shaking the last bits out and scraping the pot with a spoon. "Where's breakfast?" Belustian asked, his stomach pitching. "This is breakfast. If you were looking for the pork chops smothered in gravy, we ain't put them out yet." "Can I get a couple of fried eggs and toast to go with those black beans and yellow rice?" Belustian asked. The chef's posture stiffened. "Do I look like a cook to you?" "You'll forgive me for misunderstanding that hat and apron." "Toque. It's a toque. A cook is what I ain't." He scowled indignantly and marched away with a pot in each hand. There was fried chicken, braised greens, pock-marked grandmother's bean curd, and then finally a breakfast station where he got eggs, bacon, potatoes, beans, tortillas, and 7 cups of coffee. Belustian picked the tray up with trembling but capable hands and transported it with a slight lurch to the register, where an amused young man with long legs and very large teeth was joking with a doctor in a white coat. All he heard was gas. Was it grim laughter that followed at the prospect of a gas attack, or a weak joke about gas? The young man counted the coffees and looked up. "Thirsty?" "Just bring it up," he said. He scratched his cheek and cleared his throat, sending a squib of mucus onto the tray. The cashier stared at it as it hung off the edge and stretched. "What's your charge account?" "I'm on my own account. I pay silver," he said. "I'm not equipped for silver. Just give me a name." "Commander Solomon." He walked away and took a seat, avoiding the others. There was much to do. He had to cough the food down and take a shit if he was going to do any of it. At first he ate dutiful small bites, but as his strength returned, so did his hunger, and he wolfed it down, his mind reeling in and out of focus as disconnected memories were dealt out on a table and returned to the deck to be shuffled. Who was the dealer, fate or an inscrutable deity, he wondered. As he was sopping up the last of the yolk and refried beans with the last tortilla, Cowrie and Whitehead, his partners, arrived, looking like boiled owls. They sat down across from him. "Where'd you get the pants?" asked Whitehead. "Why'd you make me drive?" asked Belustian. He now felt certain that he had suffered persecution at his partner's hands. The paranoia, which he had swallowed with his meal, surged back. "Because," Cowrie said, "you were in the bathroom puking for 2 rounds of shots." Whitehead said, "You were the sober one, remember? We talked about it, I think." "It's a good thing I don't remember. It was the most terrifying night of my life. I'm still shaking. Look." He held his hand up. It trembled. "Where's your food, anyway?" On Whitehead's tray was a candy bar and 2 cups of coffee, and on Cowrie's was a glass of orange juice, a glass of water, and a cup of coffee. Cowrie said defensively, It's a continental breakfast. It's what they serve in France. Whitehead snickered into his palm and unwrapped the candy bar with the mesmerizing smile of an imbecile. I'm going to shower and dress. I'll see you downstairs, said Ballustian. After an explosive bowel movement, a hasty and incomplete shave with blood and stranded patches of grizzle, and a shower, he walked the halls in search of a red line elevator, as it was the only one with access to the bunkers, and that was where they were to meet. He got off on level B5, and after that the way was dark and smothering, as the perpetual wet of the Manhattan underworld closed in, the odor of puddles and mold collecting in tunnels buried deep in the bedrock. Something between a possum and a rat with glowing eyes lived in the walls and pulled its pink tail into crevices when anyone went by. Insects darted out of the corner of his eye, large winged arthropods with pincers and masses of larvae contracting as his light passed, bugs brought back from the Martian caverns on water ships. Finally, he came to a gray hallway with a yellow stripe painted down the middle and people pushing carts back and forth as on a busy concourse, all keeping to the right of the line. He crossed into the traffic and motored forth until he came to the office door designated Group D and took his seat at the table. In the corner was a clothes rack with 6 full sets of red federal armor. Only his commander, Solomon, was there, staring at her baton. She was absorbed in thought and seemingly unaware of his presence. He took a seat across from her and she ran her hand through her hair. Where are the others? She asked. She sounded severe and unhappy. They'll be here, he said. What I have to say to you all. But that was fine work, I suppose. Of a kind. Ah, good. The door opened. He didn't turn around to look. What was the point? He is to die. It will be now or later. And what is later? What is now? His partners sat down on either side of him. They too had bathed and clothed in simple cotton pants and a tunic. We are to deploy immediately, the commander said. You are to carry out your mission as planned. As to the uniforms, I commend your results, but criticize your methods, which are shameful. Ballustian, you staggered into this base covered in vomit. You had to be subdued and carried to the barracks. You drove here. What if you'd been pulled over with the armor? They looked at the table and pouted. Whitehead raised his hand a little and muttered, Sir? Whitehead, have you something to say? With all respect, we got loaded. Things got out of hand. I don't know how. I'm sure it'll never happen again. Sir, I apologize, said Ballustian. I shouldn't have had those last 5 shots. You know how it is when they're going down? Exactly, said Cowrie. They were just going down like water while we were waiting for those whores. It was uncanny how it went down without effect. I agree, Ballustian said, nodding his head and looking up at her with marbled eyes. It was uncanny. Her eyes were piercing now, and she directed them at Ballustian's soul. I need you to carry out this mission, and we cannot have a bloodbath. Timing is critical. You do what you have to do to get them shooting, and that's it. When your mission is done, your role in this Group D ends. And then she leaned forward. But Group D is never dissolved. Subsequent related findings may reband the group. Under no circumstances do you divulge any knowledge of Group D, its constitution, actions, or the existence of a Group D designation at all. Failure to observe this condition will result in immediate live execution by acid. Aye, exclaimed the 3. Ballustian hated armor. That was why he went to intelligence services. None of that military bullshit like what they just endured. And now, squeezing into another person's suit. It smelled like them. It was shaped to their bodies, creased where they were creased. And the data feed was formatted for their eyes, their brains, their tics. He spent a few minutes teaching it to fit him, and then, once he got the kink out of the breathing hose, adjusted the air to his liking. It actually seemed to help his raging stomach and hammering head. It made him feel less vulnerable, less shaky and terrified. He felt safe for the first time. At noon, buses and limousines pulled up to the curb at the UN, one after the other, and soldiers dressed all alike in red armor poured out like ants, swarming to their positions on the UN plaza. Among them were Belustian, Whitehead, and Cowrie. Simultaneously, every guard stationed on the plaza from the previous shift flowed out to the buses. They did not pause to speak to one another, although individuals touched hands or nodded as they passed. Red suits. Red suits everywhere, in clumps. Some were talking on the phone, some stood at attention guarding nothing, some milled about gossiping and guffawing through the windows of their helmets. They each were weighed down with grenades, batons, a rifle, and 2 pistols loaded with implosion rounds. He was close to the main doors leading out of the General Assembly building, the route Senator Maximilian would take. Belustian gazed up and down the plaza. It was meditative. He scanned his territory. He watched the people. He breathed slowly and took it in, waiting. Because they all looked the same, he studied the way they moved. After an hour of watching 2 teams across the way, he settled on Mark 1, a tense, jumpy red suit whose finger never left the trigger of his gun. He would take his shot, and the other was sure to respond with a full-on salvo. In the confusion, Belustian would break left and take a second shot at the second team. Team 2 were slovenly and not ready to return fire, except for one apparently officious ass who lectured the others, making wild gestures with his hands. Periodically, he touched the stock of his rifle and felt for the trigger. He would be the second shot. Shooting would occur in 4 directions. Plan worked out, Belustian took up his post and stared at his targets and his partners through the data stream, waiting. The armor, which had felt so comforting at first, had become a clammy, ripe-smelling body bag. His head ached with a sharp, radiating pain, and his stomach was bloated with the food he had crammed down his gorge. Stomach acid hissed in his gullet. He could feel the toxins venting from his lungs and guts, oozing from his pores. He began to drift about in his mind. Periodically, sleep overtook him, though he remained standing and ostensibly alert. The plaza swam in his eyes. Every breath was labored, and the recycled air was dirty and hot. It stank of his own decay and shame. The data feed was making it worse. It was distracting to have all that information. The constant throb of lights in his eyes and the clangy, changing focus of the helmet, if he moved the wrong way, were making him dizzy and nauseous. He felt trapped. The gear was stupidly heavy. He was weighed down with armor and weapons when all he really needed was a pistol, light armor, and a good pair of shoes. These boots sucked. He couldn't run if he had to. You don't need all that armor if you can run. In some attacks, he'd rather not survive. Many a broken soldier had been extracted from their heavy armor, only to be euthanized. By 1 o'clock, he was wheezing and felt like his mind had contracted to be no larger than a pea. What could a brain that size do? It couldn't even operate his body. He'd be flopping around on the floor. Birds were smart, and they had little brains, but not as small as his felt. His was more like a mollusk brain, or one of those blind Martian bugs in the tunnel. He made eye contact with Whitehead and Cowrie. The teams were starting to form up on the plaza. It was clear overhead. The flags were limp. Nothing stirred. Then, there was the flap and flutter of wings as a flock of parrots burst off the levee wall and circled over the plaza, screaming squawks and pink and white feathers filling the air. Belustian willed himself to focus. A mere 7 minutes had passed. It felt like he had been lost for an hour. 7 minutes! He watched. Mark I swam around in a 5-member team. They stood in 2 wobbling lines of attention facing the doors. Belustian yielded to nature and let out a long, exhausting fart which relieved a stabbing cramp but further degraded the air. He was both relieved and hated himself himself as he would another. What was that about anyway, he wondered. When you watch yourself doing something, he thought, who's watching? Who's watching now? The more he thought about it, the more annoyed he became. It had to end somewhere, but he never got to it. There was always someone watching, and it was always him. Spaced out again. Hypoxia. It was known defect of red suits. Sometimes the red suit failed. He forced himself to look at the world through his eyes and stop thinking the way he had been trained. Focus. Receptive. Mark II's team stood in a loose circle. He looked to where he would move after the first shot. To the left, halfway to Whitehead, the destination was drenched in glare. From there, Mark II was a straight shot. Belustian gripped the stock and curled his finger on the trigger. He waited to hear the doors opening and the footsteps. Only when he knew it was Maximilian would he fire. He was not going to aim. He was going to raise the barrel of the rifle and point it at the mark. It shouldn't hit them, and the mark will return that fire blindly. Of that Belustian was certain. He blinked the time off from the data feed and then all the other distracting crap. He watched his mark. The doors to the UN swung open. He let out a stinking breath and waited for Maximilian to step into sight. The teams on the plaza seemed even nearer now. It was a small space, intimate, dense with cars, with guns and grenades, and soldiers suffocating in their armor. Belustian's eyes bulged at the window between them and the world. They were close now. He made his mark. Maximilian was approaching. His two aides passed by first. It was him, no doubt about it. He looked grim, scared even. His skin was drained of blood and his eyes were nervous, moving about. Belustian paused to scan the plaza for his detail. They made eye contact through their face masks. He raised the barrel of his gun, pointed it toward Mark I, and fired, as did Cowrie and Whitehead, their shots echoing apart off the buildings. Then several guns went off, as each of the teams they had fired on returned that fire. The other teams attempted to scatter, but the drive was narrow and full, and they only plowed into each other like football players deprived of sense and purpose in the midst of a play. Some tried to climb the iron fence and got caught up in the bushes. In the fray, Belustian and the others took up their new positions and fired again. Now everyone on the plaza fell under fire from everyone else, and the air exploded. It spread across the Secretariat, where guards stumbled into the fountain to escape the general gunfire. Belustian started to laugh when he saw what he had done. The red suits fired at each other in all directions. The bullets thudded against their red armor, knocking them flat. Injured guards rose on their feet and attempted to stagger to safety, but there was no safety, only chaos. In the midst of it all was Maximilian. His red hair, receding badly, was glowing and beaded in sweat. His earlier apprehension had turned to panic. His eyes screamed as the crowd carried him off. He seemed to float on the mob of red suits around him. And then, as a red arm handed him a helmet and chain-mailed tunic, a red spot appeared on his forehead. His eyes widened and his head trembled and imploded, ending the life of the ruler Maximilian IV, senator from New York. It was time to run. Belustian looked for an out in the opposite direction, the General Assembly building, and saw instead, emerging from the building into the riot, a crowd of congressional staffers rushing out of the doors for lunch, oblivious to the firefight around them. The first salvos broke down slews of aides whose bodies began to pile up before the shooting slowed, in heaps of headless, limbless corpses dressed in singed, bloody business clothes smoking beneath the blazing sun. Many senators and House members, when they saw what was happening, turned back to the entrance, but many also fell and lay critically wounded on the sidewalk and in the drive. Without immediate medical attention, they would be beyond regeneration and would have to clone and start all over again. it wasn't like Maximilian could grow a new head. Gunfire diminished to erratic bursts and single strays, and then the air chugged, and a shiny black NYPD gunship bellied up to the plaza. The loudspeaker ordered in a voice that pierced the brawl of the engines, "Lay down your weapons." Instantly, muzzles swung skyward as all of the soldiers on the plaza fired on the gunship. But their charges and bullets bounced off the armor or repulsed by wave. Downtown and uptown war choppers arrived, landing along First Avenue. 2 scythe cannons emerged from the belly, and the gunner cranked out a volley of rounds that penetrated the armor as if it were a layer of skin. Red suits went down, torn to pieces by bullets. They returned fire and sought cover behind parked vehicles and planters, but mostly they hid behind each other. Belustian saw no way out. He had on red armor. He was a target now. Frantically, he ripped away at the straps and deflated it. The bodies of fleeing guards smashed into him, and as he surged about, trying to undo the armor in small pauses, red-sleeved arms and booted legs, red helmets full of goo, splattered across his path. He made for First Avenue. He got the helmet off, and then the upper. There was a line of bushes ahead. He could dive for it. That would work. Then he could lie there and get the rest off, make for the street a civilian. That was it, the way out. He took a deep, fetid breath. Belustian felt a strange elation as he dove for the bushes, as if he were being carried or borne aloft by hands. He soared through the air. At midpoint in his arc, the muzzle of the scythe poked through the back belly of the helicopter and unleashed a volley. A round entered Belustian's head, and he fell through a rain of bullets, dissolving to a mist before he hit the ground. Thank you. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce Svetlana Lavochkina, a wonderful writer whose first book I edited, Zap. She was born in the Soviet Union and is Ukrainian and emigrated in the 90s to Germany, but her first love was English and American literature. And she made the radical and interesting decision to write in English. She lives in Germany, and she writes exclusively in English. And she's going to be reading from her second novel and novella called Damn Duchess. I don't think I'll say anything else. So welcome, Svetlana. Thank you.
Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen. Do you hear me well? Yeah. Right. First off, I would like to thank you for coming. And although each of my fingers is a fetus of jet lag, all the more the better, you know. It is exciting to be reading at 3 a.m. my time. And I wanted to say that literature is a series of serendipitous events. And long ago, I stopped marveling at that. You know, I finished this book, this novella, the day before my second son was born. And then I thought, well, I can just as well give birth now. Now I'm ready. And, well, literature is also a series of serendipitous acquaintances. Had it not been for my faithful literary friend Eric, who had written me a letter, 8, 9 years ago and offered me literary friendship. I would have never met Jon, who is his friend, and had I never met Jon, I would never have met Miet, who liked my work well enough to want to publish it. A couple of words about Damn Duchess, what it is. What I do, basically, I self-proclaim to be historical burlesque. I work with historical events, I do a lot of research, and then I mash it up and I process it in my own way to do a work of fiction. As already said, I was born in the Soviet Union, in a failed industrial giant of a city. Zaporozhye will say nothing to you. It used to be a 1 million city, and when all Jews left, there were maybe 700,000 left. Zaporozhye is famous for its great dam that stands on the even greater river Dnieper. And it was built by the same engineer who built the Hoover Dam. And it was quite an exciting story. The dam was built as, well, it was a sample of industrialization, and it was built under the conditions of Stalin's purges. And there is this protagonist who is a distitled duchess. Back then, after the revolution, all this strict hierarchy of classes and ranks got mixed up, and all incredible marriages appeared that wouldn't have been possible before the revolution, and incredible careers sparked off. I'm going to read from the beginning to give you a foretaste of the novel. In my lack of imagination, I didn't think of anything better, but I hope the choice is not the worst. So, Damn Duchess. Iosif Vissarionovich Stalin fancied hydropower, the water muscle of Soviet industry. He squiggled in his notes. He summoned mechanic cats and the best engineers of Moscow to his study. Thrice the word Zaporozhye seeped through his pepper and salt mustache. But we have neither technology nor qualified staff to build the Dnieper Dam, implored the best engineers in chorus, their eyes wandering from their shoes to the portrait of Lenin on the wall, right above Chieftain Stalin's head. And what do you think, Comrade Katz? Iosif Vissarionovich asked the main mechanic of Gunpowder Factory, the renowned revolutionary Chaim Katz. Of all the Bolsheviks, this Katz had made the most incendiary contribution to putting an end to the old way of things. He had organized the smuggling of explosive for sieging the Tsar's palace, for fighting at the barricades. I'm a simple stoker, Comrade Stalin, said Katz. I don't know much about hydropower, but I know our Soviet workers are the best in the world. It is them who must build the dam. Well said, Comrade Katz, said the chief, lighting up his pipe. So be it. The best engineers of Russia didn't dare to exchange glances. And who is the best engineer of river dams in the world? Stalin inquired. An American, Hugh Winter, replied the last Tsar's Minister of Industry, ex-Count Alexandrov, trying his best not to stutter. You said it. We shall tow this winter here across the ocean, and you, so-called engineers, incapable sycophants, will be under his command. Katz, you are appointed superintendent. Pack your suitcase, and when you're finished, I will come and look at our dam myself. Chaim Katz went pale, and the first gray hair lit up on his temple. Thank you for putting your communist trust in me, Comrade Stalin, he said. Impossibly, randomly as the high wind hit, the engineers, stone-struck against the wall, knocked on the oak panels in their minds. Good riddance. If anyone's head was to fall, it was this upstart head of a Katz. By the way, Katz, Chief added, raising himself from the table, don't forget to bring this posh wifey of yours with you. It's high time she was of some use to her renewed motherland. And Iosif Vissarionovich Stalin smiled with all his boxed furrows, bidding the conference goodbye. It is a matter of hours for the rails from both ends to meet. Ready to run endless rail cars with gravel for the greatest water mincer in the state of proletarians. Shiny and taut, tick the gear trains of muscles. The bone cogs click under the clock-faced chests. Men's mullet-ended arms turn madly around the shoulder pivots, bolting each second into the iron rails. Shudders wreck the quarries with gritty fountains. The workers' jaws freeze in frenetic grins. Women knead concrete with their feet. Steel buckets descend on them right out of the myopic sun, ladle the grey porridge, lifted on September rays and swayed through the air to spew the brew into the mammoth bowls for whatever foundations, whatever spillways, whatever piers. Twice, thrice in a shift, a worker is carried away, covered with burlap from head to feet, his chest squashed by a granite block. Once a fortnight, a drowned surveyor breaks the surface of the river. Those who disappear are rumored to have been caught in the pour of the concrete and entombed in the dam for eternity. Along the banks stand slow oaks, wiggly willows, sprinkler limes, which long ago lost count and sequence of the steppe conquerors, the White Army or the Red, left socialists, Machno gangs, or partisan volunteers. Civil war lasted a tiny but unpleasant spell of 5 growth rings. So the slow timbers barely acknowledged that it was over, that the political power has firmly settled with the Bolsheviks. Listless at the fall equinox of 1929, they dazzled the riverbanks with their gold, as if buying themselves off any further bloodshed. Building fever has seamlessly followed the Civil War. The dismembered country is now being stitched together by electric cables, securely welded by steel, gagged by concrete. Zaporozhye is exactly in the middle between the capital Moscow and Odessa at the Black Sea, the wild Dnieper parting the 2 buttocks of the banks. This backwater town suddenly promises to become the 3rd largest city of the new empire. A reporter from Moscow aims at the workers with his Kodak. Happier, happier, do our Dnieper song, urges Daria Katz, ex-Duchess Lovochkina, her gaunt outline bas-reliefing against a wall of expensive pink tuff. The future machine hall, a wonder of constructivist avant-garde. Her cropped hair, strawberry blonde, merges with the stone into a huge lion mane. Man said to the river Dnieper, I will lock you by the wall, so that falling from the summit, water tamed like wayward horse, quickly moves the modern vehicles, pushing trams and trains along. Obediently, the workers wail the song, but the river drowns the words in its barking, froth on its muzzle, like a wolfhound bitch on heat in her father's kennels. Daria wrote the lyrics herself. She even composed the tune, and then drilled the song into the staff at long trade union meetings, with militia guards on the flanks. It is her duty as Dnipro personal manager and head of propaganda to boost the morale on the construction site, to invent peppy slogans and write theme songs for performing at work. Her responsibility is also translating, mediating between the superintendent and the best engineer of dams in the world. At their first tour of the construction site, their two aged leather suitcases still unopened, her husband unfolded a carpenter's instrument kit. This, Daria, is a chisel. It's forced into wood to cut it. These are wrenches. We use them to provide grip and mechanical advantage in applying torque to turn objects, usually screws, nuts, and bolts. Cuts screws no winches and drives me nuts, she mocks with a solemn face. In fact, Daria loves detail. If it concerned the minutest trifles of a dress cut, a frill, a breast dart, a ruffle, or a hem, she would know the words with equal perfection in Russian, English, and French. She could exactly tell Persian silk from Chinese, Peruvian wool from English. Fashion aside, were it poetry or fiction, she would be able to discern their minutest style nuances, capering freely within three literatures. Text memories evoke recognizable mellow tastes on her tongue. Even with the propaganda poems she scrolls for survival, she knows how to enjoy herself. She also knows how to wield the available, palatable supply of manpower. When she met the best engineer of dams at the railway station, her insight pleasantly warmed to medium rare. At the end of a 2-minute small talk, she sensed that Mr. Winter, skipping the intermediate phases, was already overcooked. The next day in his cottage, Hugh Winter tried to coax her out of a victory nap with an enlightening hydraulic speech corroborated by a different textbook in English and brand new. Near the bottom of the dam wall, Daria, there is the water intake. Gravity causes it to fall through the penstock inside the dam. At the end of the penstock, there is a turbine propeller, which is turned by the moving water. The shaft from the turbine goes up into the generator, which produces the water, the power. Even awake, she would not be able to tell a generator from a turbine. The stages of the great construction site hung in her mind in maggot abstraction. More buzzwords of the day than anything real. Rock clearance, grout curtain, excavation. To her, Dnipro Dam was nothing but a monster porcupine of concrete with needles of steel. Daria's domain before the revolution had been the turbines of love, the rotors of desire. At the last Tsar's New Year's ball, the Pearl Hall whirled to Strauss and Chopin. Rubies glistened in pink silk and sapphires and blue brocade. Chandeliers tinkled with crystal icicles. Diadems, tiaras, earrings, bracelets scurried around and around. Untrained eyes would burst in their sockets unless they had a straw to hold on. A golden straw that wouldn't get lost in the ball storm. Who's this miracle? Daria, the debutante. And they were all ready to throw themselves at her feet for a single waltz, for a single brush of her lock against their shoulder straps. All the male members of the diplomatic corps from Brazil to Norway, the officers from lieutenants to generals, the courtiers from master of ceremony to butler blackamoors. On his Moscow promotion tour of Zorro, Douglas Fairbanks forgot all about Mary Pickford when he saw Darya Voronchina, now deprived of title but still unmarried, in her still unpawned ball dress. Darya was more of a devotee of Rudolph Valentino types, but in 1917 Rudolph Valentino was still an obscure bit part. Ex-Duchess was named in honor of her grandmother, whom the great poet Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin himself had loved madly. A squirt of poetry was no stranger to Darya herself. In 1913, she had published 3 poems in a symbolist literary magazine, Northern Lily, more due to the grace of her ivy legs around the editor's stern than to the elegance of the merits of her metrical feet. Her Excellency watches the workers just as her ancestors would watch their serfs in the fields, as if they all still belonged to her, ready to bow to the ground. For each of them, she has a file in her personal manager's cabinet. Most of the employees are of virginally proletarian descent, but she knows exactly which of them are not. Former Tsar's gendarmes, priests, clerks, White Army officers. Their genuine files are hidden in the second rows of the shelves. Altogether, she keeps the personal data in artistic, deliberate disarray. The moving mob exudes feral vigor, the same vigor that had executed the last Tsar a decade ago and married her to mechanic cats, a manic Bolshevik and a Jew. The table of ranks was abolished, and with it, all the wealth of Russian highnesses and graces, replaced by a yelping comrade. Here she is, Comrade Katz, instead of Her Excellency, doing very well, meaning alive, unlike her colleagues, Tsarina's ladies-in-waiting. For now, she is safe behind the bony back of her husband, favored by the great helmsman Stalin at the moment. Unhampered by coffins, the late Duke and Duchess, gun holes in their napes, would bounce in the ravine in a Moscow suburb to behold the sight of their Jewish son-in-law, who had never wielded a fork in his life, of their only granddaughter who eats her snots, and, much worse, knows no word of English or French. As Darya has no idea of how to raise a child without an army of nannies and governesses, her girl is growing up like an urchin. Filthy, unkempt, little Manya hops about the site and hides in the quarry, braids draft horses' manes, and romps with workers' children in the barracks. Their butts sore from mother's spanking, the camp kids soon stop bullying the daughter of the personnel director and superintendent. Manya actually proved to be a robust playmate and an excellent food thief. The last nails are thrashed into iron and the rails meet. Jangling moles followed by the workers' happy cause rack Darya with infernal vibrations. A calico dress irritates her skin with the cheap fibers. 13 years have passed, but this itch is the last thing that remains unsubdued by the power of habit. The newfangled fashion relieved one from the need of a servant, not that she hadn't learned to do without them long ago. She is accustomed to pewter cutlery, to bad food, even to dirty language surrounding her around the clock. Now her teal eye lingers on an athletic Nikolai from the Digger Brigade of Cossack descent, remotely a Rudolph Valentino type. Nikolai returns her gaze, grins cockily, more with his eyebrows than his lips, yet Undecided whether Cossacks are politically safe at the moment, Daria has placed his file in the second row of the upper shelf. The rapids roar like Primus stoves. There is a baker's dozen of them, each with its own name and temperament. The little rapids are called cows, and they indeed moo in the tide. The bigger rapids are one too much, grinning with granite wolf's teeth, schoolgirl claiming the highest death toll, and glutton, beside which the water is not water anymore but something hard. Glutton chases the boats past itself like hair on end. The river is a chronic storm in which each wave is forever nailed to its place, ever repeating its atrocious route since the days of yore. The water leaps upwards, and the locals call it thunder. "Who the hell has given the horse rotten hay?" yells Hypecats. He's picking at liquid horse dung with his high boot. "If this one kicks the bucket too, you will drag the gravel on your own back. I'm not buying another horse. Do you hear me, petrol slob? Aye, comrade Hats, do I not?" The stout Petro scratches his nape lazily and goes on to whip the mare. "No, you don't, beast. I will check the hay tonight. If it's rotten, you're fired. Hear me?" "And how well do I hear you, comrade Katz?" Petro says, whispering quietly into his sleeve. "Fuck a Jew twice." Before the revolution, Mechanic Katz learned all about cauldrons. At revolution time, he learned all about gunpowder. Dizzy, awed with a breathtaking promotion, he gulped down all the textbooks he could find on hydroelectric stations. The principles were not difficult to grasp, but his hair endemically catching the gray of October steppe, Katz realized that the foremost vital knowledge he now had to acquire was about the slow hydraulics of the working masses, the mechanics of the folk gray matter. Katz had been quickly shown that gunpowder was much safer to handle than 10,000 proletarians gathered in one place, a volatile compilation from all over the huge ex-Russian Empire. Peasants who ran away from forced collectivization and mandatory confiscation of crops, runaway felons seeking disguise in the crowd, soldiers of defeated civil war armies, ruined merchants, petty nobility, Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, Mongols, Armenians, Finns, Tatars, Tajiks crossbreed in the damn nation's crucible, creating gene mosaics hitherto unseen. At first, when the superintendent ordered the damn village to be built, the living conditions were bearable, but now, the quantity of workers having surged from 1,000 to 10, their life became appalling. 30 to 50 people crammed in one bunkhouse, claustrophobia, hatred, and brawl. Every week, due to the workers' sloppiness, some of the finished construction fragments fell down and equipment was spoiled by bad maintenance. Culprits were sought and found or invented and punished severely, but malpractice didn't stop. To curb drunken carousals, Katz declared alcohol prohibition on the dam, its results the same as in America. The workers were not allowed to leave the premises of the construction site unless they were dismissed, and dismissal was a reason enough for an execution because it usually followed a display of sabotage or wicked negligence, incompatible with the building of the first socialist state in the world. Only one thing would give them a day off: accomplishing a heroic deed of communist labor. The Dnieper Dam construction began with the launch of a field canteen for 8,000 lunches a day. Daria Katz's first dam head of propaganda experience was a slogan poem on the poster that was printed by Dan Press and hung everywhere about the workers' camp. It depicted a Degas-style Amazon in red, soaring over a frail, apron-down, kneaded housewife. No slaves of home kitchen we are anymore. Machines will do the onerous work. We women can now knead the concrete while factory kitchens roast pork. Superintendent Katz ordered the equipment in Germany because in the USSR no one had ever heard of large-capacity field canteens. The kitchen factory was purchased from the sale of wheat confiscated from 20 local villages. So the peasants of those local villages ate cats, dogs, grass, boots, and then each other. Knowing much about heat, loving the heat, Katz couldn't help caressing the broad iron hips of the cooking stove. He brushed his cheek against the white noble animal of newly delivered cauldrons, in which, if necessary, he himself could be boiled. The wise Siemens machines cut bread and vegetables, shaped meatballs, cooked, baked, and did the dishes without any human help. Still, of 8,000 lunches, only 3,000 were regularly consumed. Canny cooks stole half of the supplied meat, mixed cardboard into mincemeat to make up for the weight loss, and then shaped the diluted meatballs smaller by another third. In this way, Canny Cook's children had meatballs full pork and free, and other workers' children had a chance for full pork at the price of a day's wage a pound. Horse carts delivered food on site in thermos jars with bluish soups reeking of carrion and cesspool, so the workers preferred to live on water and bread. It took 2 years of rebukes and threats, red-handed catch and firing, before the superintendent was finally able to fairly state in the kitchen inspection protocol, laudably rare do surprises, such as cockroaches and mice, occur in the canteen food. Meanwhile, he had to allow each worker brigade of 30 men to keep their own kitchen maid in the bunkhouse, who, for 15 rubles a month, cooked edible lunches, did their laundry, and satisfied their male necessities. The latter service was not kitchen maid's favorite part, and they kept complaining. Katz tried to move the she cookies to a separate women's hostel for night, but then the workers sought sex off-site and returned with their pants all aflame with glap. So the superintendent had but to reinstall the communal field wives in brigade barracks as a warrant of men's health. Katz loved touching nice things. Gradually, this love gave place to the compulsive necessity of indiscriminate tactile intimacy with the entire construction site. The superintendent puts his calloused hands on everything within his sight, like a royal taster ready to earth any peril by his own life. He fumbles the gravel from the quarry, checking whether the right caliber is in the right cart for the right pier. He checks the cart wheels. He pokes mincemeat with his fingers, defining at once the ratio of cardboard in it. Lest he faint from the miasma of 1,000 proletarians dischargers, Katz lights a strong cigarette before approaching the latrines with a bucket of chlorine. After lunch breaks, he profusely powders each hole. He ardently tries to teach the workers to do that themselves, but they never learn to deem it necessary. Whenever a new bunkhouse is built, Hein checks if the doors are hung sturdily on latches. At the beginning of each shift, he puts his nose close to the workers' faces and sniffs their breath. At midnight, he storms into the barracks with an uncharged pistol and tramples the gamblers' cards into the earth floor. he hurls moonshine bottles against the wooden halls. Returning into the headquarters bunkhouse to his marital bed in the short hours, Katz falls asleep with his boots on. His features blatantly Jewish. His family name a caricature for a Slavic ear. The workers call him Comrade Shitpik, which is mainly to play down their fear of his short-tempered bursts.
We got some books and some drinks while we strike all this stuff. Feel free to indulge, and thank you. Good night.